My degree in college was in math, and so it was, of course, back before the big boom of everything. So I'm obviously dating myself, but when I was in college, I took a programming class, and like I said, that wasn't my major, but 4 hours later, I walked out of the programming class and I felt like 30 minutes had gone by. And it was at that point I realized that programming was something that I could really dive into and get lost in. Maybe it's equivalent to how I watch my children in video games, where they're so engrossed in it. And I knew I had found something that really kept my attention, and I liked the problem-solving component of it. I liked the artistic side of it. And by that, I don't necessarily mean the design and the art side of it, but unlike some other engineering disciplines where you have to follow the laws of physics, in programming and IT, there's a little bit more leeway, and you can add your own personal flavor to how you write code or how you develop some of these things. And so that's why I went into it. And yeah, it's been a good path. So I'd ask you the same thing. Why did you go into it?
Well, for me in high school, I had a lot of different interests, so it was really hard for me to decide what I really wanted to do. But I was always really good at math and science. Coming from a family where she's my mom and my sister's an engineer and all that sort of stuff, I knew I wanted to do something technical. But I was also really into art in high school. I still am. And I always really like being creative and doing design. So I wanted something that kind of implemented both. And while it might sound contradictory, like computer science was why I chose, because you kind of do get a little bit of both. It's a little different sort of creativity. It's more of a problem solving creativity, but there's also opportunities for me to be able to show that design side as well. So that's why I chose it, because it kind of implemented my two strongest sides and let me get the best of both worlds.
So education and certifications, those really depend on the role within IT. So if you're going to go into networking, you're going to want to look at your CCNAs and some of those other networking certifications to understand them. I think that's really important there. But for software development, it's really you should have some coding in your tool belt. That it's very difficult to hire somebody who doesn't have any of that. If you coded in .NET, that would be a good one. So either learn something like Java or .NET, because although they're not the same, it's similar. That if you understand how to write in that language, you could probably carry it over to this one. Also understanding, if you want to be a software developer, understanding web design versus app design. And I think it's, for me, with my team, I like to look for somebody that has touched a database before, and also that understands the concepts of cloud technologies and basically what cloud is. And so, Rachel, you've had several internships, and so I'd be interested to hear what you thought what helped you, and what you could have brought to the table that you didn't have.
Yeah, well, for me, it was I got a lot of my programming experience from, of course, majoring in computer science and having a lot of experience from each internship and having different projects. I think the education part, especially for like finding software engineering internships, because that's really primarily what I've had, was a little bit less important than what experience you had with it. I had a lot of non-computer science majors in my software engineering internship this past summer, but they had a lot of experience with hands-on projects that they built themselves, or community projects or that sort of thing. So for me, I noticed the education did make it a little bit easier, but it's really more about like the experience that you have. And there's a lot of unknowns when it comes to programming and making your way up into it, but you can really only learn by making projects, and that can be on your own time as well.
Director of Solutions Delivery, and that is a pretty broad description. But it does describe what I do, which is to oversee the delivery of all kinds of IT solutions. And we focus a lot on SaaS products and taking a product that's out there and integrating it in within the environment that we have. So my responsibilities are overseeing a team, making sure that I track the technical work, not from an in the weeds developer perspective, but ensuring that the solution that's being delivered and that they're working on meets the expectations of the customer. And that can be a challenging task because sometimes development can get along months down the line in a very large project before you see anything that you can show, because it's almost like putting a building in place. You have to put the infrastructure in before you can see the walls. And so being able to connect those dots and ensure that we're delivering what the customer expects, and communicating them back and forth. So I'm orchestrating the solution at large. So Rachel, how about some of the internships that you've had?
Yeah, I've had I can have more of like a high level description of some of the things I've done. I've had 3 internships while I've been in college, and they've all been pretty diverse. I've kind of been all over the place because I didn't really know what I wanted to do at first. I had an internship in cybersecurity where I basically just did some low level like vulnerability scanning. I worked alongside a network engineer and learned from him how they monitor their network and prevent mitigate vulnerabilities. My other one, I worked for cloud cost and capacity. So that was more of a data analytics role where we monitored cloud usage throughout the company and monitored the budget. I can speak a little bit more to what I did this past summer. I was a software engineer and I worked on the cybersecurity team. We were building a virtual firewall and to help monitor that sort of stuff. And so that was really cool. We're building it from the ground up and building monitors, and that's I'm trying to put my words together. But yeah, my point is that there's a lot of different things that you can do with the programming and computer science degree.
So and although I don't do a lot of programming now, Rachel did a great job of describing some of those things that a lot of the team is doing. But when I was a programmer, when I look at the folks I have now, it's taking those requirements and then basically you're sketching them out and deciding how you're going to lay out and solve these problems, and then you write the code around it. And to Rachel's point too, sometimes you're standing up virtual servers or typically not in a company the size that I'm in, would you stand up a physical one, somebody else would do that. But often you're expected in IT to wear all hats depending on the size of the company. So you may be spinning some things up in the cloud. You may be spinning up different environments and also writing the code and doing some of the database discovery and so forth. So there's a lot of hats that you can wear, and it's not typically that if you're a developer, you're not strictly just writing code. You are doing some of those tasks that are around it, whether it's testing or, like I said, setting up servers or looking at some of the security things. But having that broad knowledge of different areas is pretty important. You can be deep in some areas, but it's nice to be a little wide as well. Would you want to start with that one?
I can. I think the hardest part for me was feeling like I was underqualified and there's a lot of unknowns and not really knowing what I did know. And I was really stressed out. I remember in my early years of my undergrad, so I was like, what am I supposed to learn? What's the best path for me? How am I supposed to learn everything? And I think the most advice I would have would be to start early and looking for ways to get experience. And that doesn't even have to be an internship, although that's probably the best way to learn. I think getting started with projects and getting hands-on experience and looking for that any way you can, whether it seems not trivial or not, I think that's the best way to get your foot in the door and make sure you know make sure you're in the right direction towards figuring out what you want to do.
And it's, I'll say, if I were to give some advice, if you think that you know that IT is the path you want to go, maybe that the person knows what area they want to look at as well. Building a network is pretty important, and taking advantage of those opportunities on how you can build that network, because that's how you're going to get your jobs. And you'll work through recruiters and everything too, possibly, but network is pretty important. And ask questions. That we've had several folks bring either a relative or a neighbor or a friend in who's in high school, and I've had them sit down with my team or pull some other folks in from different areas of IT and have them ask questions about, similar to what you're doing now. So, when you say IT, that's a broad term. What does that mean? Well, in some companies, there's an enterprise data area. Well, what is that? There's data scientists and data analysts and database developers and architects. And someone might want to pull that thread and learn a little bit more about that. Or you talk about programming. Well, that's a pretty broad term to say programming. To get a better understanding of, when you say a computer programmer or a software engineer, what would you be doing? If you think it's just going to be designing computer games, that may be something that you would have the skills to do, but I would suggest that you enjoy programming and not just creating games, because I think that's what would make somebody in that field really good. And that even if it's not creating a computer game, a lot of programming is creating game. I mean, software that is like a game in some ways, which I don't know if people understand that when they're going into software engineering, that you may have the games out there, but software is software, and that I would want whoever's going into it to make sure that they're going into it because they love it. But yeah, build your network. To Rachel's point, try to dive into it and have some projects on your own if you can. The internships, that was one I wasn't really sure how to advise her on and how to find them, because we've had programs where I've set up a program before, but how do kids find it? So how did you end up finding your internships?
Well, I found them all actually through different ways. One of the programs I joined at UT, it's brand new. It's like an integrated business and engineering program, and we all get a mentor through it that works in whatever field we're interested in. And I actually just had a meeting with him before this, where he's been mentoring me for the past couple of years. But he got me my first internship in cybersecurity, but the other ones, I pretty much just either went online and looked up software engineering internships or computer science internships and just applied to whatever. I also went to my career fair, and I found my favorite internship actually was just, my last person I talked to ended up giving me an interview, and I've loved it ever since. So it's really just finding every other way, career fairs, online, your network. That's really how I found all of mine.
I look for new staff. Like I said, my team does a lot of cloud type integrations, and so someone that has an interest and an understanding of that, the full stack development type of engineer, because they can do, but they're like a Swiss Army knife. They can do different areas up and down the stack. And we are, where I am currently, looking for someone that's certainly a team player and likes to work with others, isn't afraid to ask questions, and for basically a culture fit for whoever it is that I'm working with, and that could change depending on what the team looks like. But IT is definitely a team type job, even though you can be very isolated at times. But it is something that you will be collaborating with other people on, and having that mindset, I think, is important. definitely problem solving. You better be a good problem solver and be able to, I do ask people, tell me a difficult problem that you've had to solve and what your part was in it. And sometimes just having them walk through that lets me know how they think and how they would connect the dots. And so that's more important to me than the lines on their resume. I want to know that they know how to solve problems. It depends. Like right now, I'm all consumed with projects, but I have to. In IT, you need to stay up on things. The only constant in IT is change, and that in the decades that I've been in IT, it seemed like as a developer, I was constantly learning new languages, learning new platforms, and that's something you have to do to stay as an engineer and stay in as a builder. And as a manager, I need to know about where the industry is trending and where we're going so that I can help plan for that and set our strategy for how we're going to move forward. So it's very important to at least track it and be aware of it. And it's always been relevant. I spent a lot of time working for the Department of Defense. And so it was a super high priority then, secret clearances and everything. And, but I've also worked in retail and of course now in healthcare, and security is a big deal. And it always has been. And I've been in, software development and the solutions delivery side. So how does it affect my role or my job now? It's something that we have to consider with everything that we put out there. That multi-factor authentication, we need to make sure that we program that in, or that our SaaS products have that, that our single sign-on, how does that work? That we have audits, and we're working with our information security department to ensure that we're following all the proper procedures and guidelines and policies. But it's always at the forefront. In fact, today I set it on my calendar to bring some of our security to talk a little bit more about MFA and the new requirements that are coming in, because it's very important. It's very important. It's only going to become more. It's changing just like everything else, but it seems like there's a lot more. I wouldn't say vulnerabilities, but exploitations than maybe we've seen as visibly in the past.
Yeah, I think it's not required for my year, but it's starting to be a more required path to take more security classes. I've taken a couple that teach a lot about safe coding practices and different vulnerabilities, but there's a lot of options at UT, especially that the program's growing. There's a lot of cybersecurity focused classes. It's actually a minor now, and that's one of the few computer science minors that they offer. And it's probably the biggest concentration that we have. So there's definitely a lot of possibility to learn whatever you need there.
Diversity is really important because you bring different mindsets and experiences to the table. And that by having that, it just adds to not only the understanding of the experience, but just helps with the solutioning to become just even better, to not just focus on serving one area, but to serve multiples. And so, yeah, I think it's really important. And I think that I think there's a lot of diversity depending on where you go, and that there are some definite opportunities, but that's really what I've seen. I think that it helps not only with the culture, but it also helps with the mindset and bringing different perspectives. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably say the same thing. I think you think about some fields of IT like software engineering, a lot of it's about user experience and serving, I guess, the community. And I think it's important to have different viewpoints, otherwise you're just serving one part of the community. And especially being in IT, I've noticed, especially in school and stuff, there's not a ton of diversity. It's a lot of white men, so it's very, it's very different. And I think it's important to have a lot more different points of view. So.
I like the problem solving. I like that there's challenges that are new almost every day, and that in my current role, well, no, I'm going to put this overall because I've been able in IT to work for the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, oil and gas, local and state utilities, government, and retail, healthcare. Just such a huge, wide range of things that I get to learn about these different businesses, and I get to learn about them in depth, but still doing the same thing. And so still doing IT and programming and so forth, but it's for a different vertical. So I do love that part because I love to be exposed to new things. I like change, and then of course I like the problem solving. What I don't like is the necessary things that you need to do. There's a lot of process and paperwork. I think I like to put in process. I like to see things work really nice and all the puzzle pieces fall into place and see something work. But there is a lot of rigor to get there. It can be very frustrating when you have a problem and you're working towards solving it, and you run up against some of the unknowns. I like to have these three buckets: the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. And when those unknown unknowns hit, it can be a challenge on how to rally everybody together to solve that. And that's it. There's normal challenges like changing requirements and scope creep. That doesn't bother me, but it's kind of the paperwork that nobody likes to do their taxes, but they it's similar to that where these are things I have to do. How about you?
I think my favorite part of the work I've done in my major is there's so many different things you can learn, and everything's really, really fascinating to me. And you think about it, technology is really where the future is going to come from, and it's pretty interesting to be learning all that sort of stuff. I think my least favorite part of it is also one of my favorite parts of it is that I feel like every new task I have to learn something new, and spending a lot of time trying to figure out what I'm doing, and it takes a lot of time to solve those problems. It's also really fun to be challenged like that, so it's kind of a win-lose situation. So I guess really,
I think that's a great point, because when I've had interns that have converted, and I've talked to them about what that was like, or some of the new engineers, that's true in IT. And I'm not sure if everybody knows that you take on something new and you have to learn, constant learning. So that constant change, constant learning, that you do throughout your whole career. Even when you're a senior engineer, you're doing that.
Yeah, I feel like every time I've never taken on a task and been an expert on it. If I've done it before, I have to go look something up on the internet and spend some time figuring out exactly what I'm doing. So,
yeah. One of the interview questions I used to ask engineers was, what do you do when you're solving a problem? And I really wanted them, as part of their answer, to say, well, I Google it, because you become very familiar with some of the sites on Stack Exchange and some of these other things on how to solve things. But constant change, constant learning.
Awesome.
And you better be humble, because you're the expert one day and the next day you're not. Yeah. So they, I know that they work together with some of the team health resources for the semester, and my employee Nalima, I probably shouldn't use her name, but my employee had, in one of our one-on-ones, had told me that she thought that she would be giving them more mundane tasks or simplistic tasks, but that they dove in and they exceeded well and above what she expected them to. And so at the end of the semester, the lead for this, who had decided to partner with Pellissippi, I believe there were 2 or 3 different teams that they had worked with, and they had each had a different task that they had to put together, and they showed them, presented them to a group of us, and they were working products. I was really impressed with the skill set of those interns, that I would certainly be looking at candidates that whose resumes came across my desk from the Pell CP program. They were good. They were good. They definitely taught them the skills that they needed to know to be able to work on these websites and these other projects. I thought that there are probably a lot of people that have an artist type mindset that don't realize the opportunities in IT, that the user experience and user design is a big deal. That there's people that they can see when they look at a screen that a pixel's off. I can't, because I don't mind a little disorganization, but they also think about where things should be situated, and it's a gift. It really is. And I've worked with some people over the years that didn't realize that talent was a career, and that you can go into IT without having to be someone that writes code all day long, that there are other paths that you can do that are just as highly valued and contribute to the overall excellent solution. So I wanted to point that out, because it doesn't have to be all, very heavily technical, that there are other areas that we rely on people with these great talents and skills. Along that path, that the deep technical knowledge, it's not just the artistic side too. It's people that know how to organize, and they also can bridge the gap between, tech talk and business talk. That's a big deal, and that's someone that can talk on both sides. They could have a career in project management or as a business analyst or something. They may be still interested in IT, but they don't want to learn how to program, or they don't want to learn about networking. But they could certainly add a lot of value and have a great career by being one of those roles where you're like business analyst, project manager, that type thing.